on how we create positive social impact through our business. And we hope that these sessions will bring value to you as professionals and also to the young professionals who are hoping to grow with their skills in different areas in the tech industry. So for a bit of housekeeping, we'll not be unmuting our mics or revealing our cameras, but instead we'll have the chat box section, which will be available for you to use for your comments and questions. And we'll have some members of our team monitoring and selecting the questions that have been upvoted. Just all the interesting questions that we can pass to our speaker to tackle. So if you have a question you'd like to be responded to, please upvote it and we will be sure to tackle it in the Q&A section. Now to our speaker. Our speaker is a senior systems engineer with 8 years industry experience in web services, SMS and USSD apps, DevOps, computer vision and visualization solutions, and he's adept in developing, deploying, and scaling fault-tolerant systems on projects for clients, and has expertise in monitoring, alerting, and automated deployments. He develops solutions to offer crucial functionalities on projects utilizing cutting-edge technology and creating high-quality code on solutions with considerations for system performance, scalability, and high availability. So our speaker today is none other than Mr. Michael Manuthu, a senior consultant in our SRE team. So yeah, thank you, Mike. Thank you for taking time to teach us a thing or two about what you do at Twiga and how you add value to our teams. So at this point, I'll hand it over to you and pick it back up in the Q&A section. Thank you. Over to you, Mike.
Okay, thank you, Sam, for the kind words. And good evening, everyone. I'm assuming everybody is in the same time zone. But if it's morning on the other side, good morning to you. The talk today is about performance monitoring. So performance monitoring is a critical function of any business, and it is important that every organization embrace it if you intend to grow. Allow me to share my screen as I click on this. Okay. Okay. Please confirm that you can see my screen.
Yes, I can see your screen. Go ahead.
Fantastic. Okay, cool. So as I was saying, performance monitoring is very critical for any business. As once you run a service, you want to be able to know that this service is performant and reliable. The topic for today is mostly focused around SRE, but a bit of it will focus also on business, and we'll see how the two will merge as the two domains merge, where the team that is involved in applications get to interface with the business operations. So what is performance monitoring? As I think mics are muted, I think best is to go on and introduce it. So it's basically the idea. It's the process of collecting, processing, aggregating, and displaying quantitative data about a system. For our case today, I want us to imagine a service that you are running. This service is maybe providing products to people. In the case of Twiga, we run e-commerce where we do an end-to-end solution. So what happens is that there are a couple of services that will be responsible for each process in the way. So in any platform that you are running, you need to be able to collect the data. You need to be able to process the data and to display this data in real time. And this data, as we go on, is what we'll be calling as metrics. What is some of the data that is collected includes, for instance, if it is an SQL query, the query type, the query count and types, how many times you are erroring, and the types of errors that you are getting. So think of a case of maybe a web service. A web service may have different status codes. So a 200 is a success, a 500 is an error, a 44 is an error. So the error rate, how often are we getting 200s? How often are we getting 500s? And so on and so forth. Then, of course, there is the processing time. The processing time is how long it takes to return or to return a response to the user. The minute you go to an app, you log in, how fast are we displaying the data that comes on your device? And that type of data is maybe server lifetimes. This is basically the uptime of the service. So all this data is critical, and it defines what performance monitoring is. So for our talk today, we're going to focus more on one, what is the kind of data that we collect? And two, how do we collect this data? And finally, we'll establish a framework through which this data that we collect, we can communicate it to the different stakeholders and establish parameters around which we can ensure that our systems and our business is operating at optimal state. Okay, so why monitor? I think this is a no-brainer for us. We monitor because, one, we want to understand the trends that are happening. So what is happening? Are we getting more traffic? Are we getting more errors? Are people responding maybe to a campaign that we have launched? So we want to be able to understand these trends. Two, we want to compare between different time groups or maybe experiment groups. So for instance, today we have launched a new feature. This feature, we want to compare it maybe with the previous feature. Are we getting more traction? Are we getting more people coming on the platform as a result of this? And of course, alerting. So alerting is basically telling support team or whoever is responsible for management of the platform that this service is maybe down, or it's maybe down. So this is basically why we do monitor for performance. The other one is, of course, troubleshooting. In case there's an issue, then you should be able to have at least some data to be able to point you in the right direction to know where the error is coming from. Now that we've talked about we've given the reason why we do monitor, what do we monitor? In this case, we'll be referring to maybe the cloud environment. It could be you are a GCP user, it could be your AWS user, it could be you have your own cloud that you've deployed on your premises, or you run maybe on a local cloud. All in all, there needs to be a way to monitor the services that are running on your platform. We've categorized the different what to monitor into three broad categories. One is the infrastructure. The infrastructure here, we are talking about the servers and the physical devices, the hardwares basically, that are involved in your in the running of your application. Applications and services. These are now the actual services that are running within the physical infrastructure. And of course, the processes are the processes that are, we are talking about processes involved in the deployment of those services, or in the management and of maybe errors, how you manage issues that arise as a result of maybe your application being down. So processes include things like incidents, how to resolve, how to troubleshoot, and so on and so forth. Let's first of all look at the infrastructure level. Just a bit of a recap. Remember, we are talking about in terms of monitoring, what is this data that we are collecting? So at the infrastructure level, I've tried to categorize them into 4 different broad categories, although there are many things at the infrastructure level. But basically, there has to be a virtual machine, whether whatever service you're running, whether it's even a serverless application, at the end of the day, it has to run within a machine somewhere. You may not see it, but it does exist. It could also be a group of machines, which are clusters. In this case, we'll focus more on Kubernetes. It could be network devices or network services that are running on your infrastructure. And finally, it could be databases. These are the 4 main categories, or the 4 main things that most services, if you have a service that is running, chances are you are at least using one of these 4 categories. So these are the 4 areas that you want to focus on. So at the infrastructure level, there are metrics that you want to look out for. These metrics are 1, the CPU utilization. So CPU utilization, I'm sure all of you understand what CPU is in a computer. So CPU utilization, you want to look at the percentage of usage for a service on your infrastructure. It could be generally speaking, or it could be maybe what process is actually consuming most of your CPU resources. The reason you look at CPU is because CPU is services tend to degrade in performance whenever CPU utilization hits a specific threshold. Most of the times you find that because of a lot of context switching, if your CPU, you're maxing out on it, then chances are that your service is running in a suboptimal way. The other thing you want to look at is memory utilization. How much of the memory is being consumed? So this is just generally speaking at the infrastructure level. So if it is a server, what memory is being utilized? Are we talking about 10% of the memory? Are talking about 90%, 100%? In the cloud, this is at least a lot of things have been simplified, because at the click of a button, you can always increase resources for a specific server. If it's a physical server, then of course you have to go to the data center or wherever your server is hosted, and you have to physically slot in a memory memory card, or if you have memory issues. So it is critical that you track this metric, because it's fundamental in the running of your service. The other thing is, of course, storage. Storage, here we're talking about the disk space. You look at it from the point of view of 1, the file system, and 2, the capacity that is in on your server. Are we running optimally? Are we running in terms of capacity? Are we running at maybe 10% of the storage, which could be good, but what happens if you have logs filling in your server? Of course, your service goes down. I remember a time, I think all of you heard about it, at least for some of us who are in Kenya. The issue that I think it was the election, was it IBC 2013, when they say that the server filled up in space. So this is a critical, I mean, it's a practical example of why it's important to monitor these things. Maybe they had monitoring around CPU, they had monitoring around memory, but nobody maybe took note of storage. So logs ended up filling the server, and of course the system crashed, and we all know what happened after that. So that's another metric that you want to be observing, and it is very critical for the running of your service. The other one is uptime. Uptime is availability of your resource. So is your server down? By down I mean is it stopped? Did somebody stop it? Did it do an did it get a kernel panic, or why is it down? It's a metric that you want to track when you're doing performance monitoring, and it is very critical both at the infrastructure level, actually across all the other categories that we mentioned. So uptime is very critical because what are you doing if you're not up? Unless now you're doing maintenances and so on. The other one, of course, is the processes that may be running. Why you want to do this, it's mostly because of security. You could be running maybe a Postgres database service that is running on your machine. Sometimes there are processes that may not be, that may be suspicious. So it is important to track like what processes are running. This one comes in handy, especially if you're doing audits and security compliance. It's important to track what processes are running. It's not particularly a metric, but it is important as far as performance monitoring is concerned. And in the domain of security, you want to do that. And now that we've briefly talked about the metrics that you want to be looking at, then what toolings are we going to? What toolings do you use when you're doing this? Because I'm mostly focusing on the cloud and in particular GCP. At least for GCP, it provides a number of tooling to measure this. I'll just mention a few of them, even as we go. One of them is Ops Agent. This one is mostly for servers and compute, basically. So Ops Agent, what it does is that it will measure for you these different metrics and give you a nice a dashboard that shows you the different utilization for each category that is mentioned here. Another metric that I think I did not include here was network. I mean, the data that is passing through your network. That's also very important. The other tool that is critical, we're focusing mostly on these two, is Prometheus and Node Exporter, at least from the infrastructure point of view, the hardware point of view. Prometheus has matured into a very powerful monitoring tool and used by very many big organizations. And it's very optimal in the way that it handles data and even visualization, especially Prometheus. If you include Grafana for the visualization, then you get to enjoy a very fully fledged open source solution that does proper aggregation of metrics and also visualization of that. Yeah, so that's on the infrastructure and the metrics. Then the other thing is the other places that you want to look out for, especially in the cloud. I'll mention Kubernetes because we are a heavy user of Kubernetes at Twiga. So the resources that you track are the nodes. The nodes are basically the machines that Kubernetes deploys its resources on. Then, of course, the pods and the containers. These are now the workloads that are running within these nodes, and of course your application that runs on your on now the different containers that are within your Kubernetes. So what kind of metrics are you looking out for when you're doing Kubernetes? Like I mentioned, Kubernetes availability is very critical. So you want to know, am I up, am I down? Two, you want to measure resource utilization. Resource utilization, especially at Kubernetes level, is very critical because they have things there. They have quotas. So quotas may be allocated on your account, or you may have you may not have enough budget. So you have to monitor resource utilization, because at the end of the day, it breaks down to it increases maybe your budget, and you want to know and observe what kind of what resources are utilizing and consuming my budget. The other thing that is critical, especially for Kubernetes, is the scalability of workloads. And scalability of workloads is important because the primary reason why people have adopted Kubernetes is the way that it scales. It's very flexible, and it scales up and down depending on the traffic that you're facing. And as a result, you want to know, is my cluster scaling? So are the workloads being scheduled as they're supposed to? Are they failing? And so on and so forth. This also helps in identifying, errors that are happening on your infrastructure. So these are important metrics, and you can always get them from things like Stackdriver, Stackdriver logs, kubestate metrics. And of course, if you have deployed Prometheus, you can always have Prometheus running on your Kubernetes, and you should be able to visualize this data. The other resources that are important to get metrics around are the databases. So at database, of course, you want to know whether the database is up. You want to look at memory utilization, the CPU utilization. And one thing I had not mentioned was query latencies. Query latencies are how fast a specific query returns, or what is the round trip for when you execute a simple SQL query to when you get the result back. So that latency is very critical when you're doing database metrics. And this comes in very handy, especially when you're trying to troubleshoot some errors that may be occurring on your system. GCP offers very nice tooling around that. Of course, if you have an in-house self-managed, there will be the other tools around that. For GCP, of course, there are system insights. This one will grant you, will give you metrics around how your memory, in terms of the processes that are running on it, and what memory each of those processes is consuming. Then, of course, Query Insights gives you insights around your query, the latencies. It sort of tries to do an explain on each query that you have executed, and it gives you the latency, or how fast your query was, how many queries have been executed similar to that. Sort of tries to group for you those queries, and ultimately you should be able to know if I'm doing maybe for every login I'm doing maybe 10 requests to one particular API. Can I be able to optimize around that? Maybe do one API call, and so on and so forth. So Query Insights provides a very nice way to do tracking around that. So around your infrastructure, we've mentioned Kubernetes, we've mentioned the infrastructure in general. then let's briefly discuss application performance monitoring. So APM, basically, what you're doing is you're tracking now the software that is running in your infrastructure for your service. So let's say you have a service that is, returning, goods for sale, for instance. So it's a products service that's running on your infrastructure. So what you want to track, one is the response time. The response time is basically the time it takes for data to be displayed once it's, a request to fetch the data is made. You want to also track the throughput. The throughput is, am I getting per second? So usually measure it in terms of per second. So throughput here, we are talking about, am I getting 10 requests per second? This is important, especially when you're doing, when you want to understand the usage, how many people are using my application, and so on and so forth. The errors are also important. Am I, what is the error rate for my application? Memory utilization is sometimes important when you're running your application. This is because you may have a memory leak somewhere, and you want to know how you can address it. So it's a metric that is important when you're running services, especially even in Kubernetes. Some services, some pods may end up, consuming a lot of requests. Limits and request set. So what it will do is just kill your pod, and you'll be wondering, how comes my pods keep, dying every so often? The query times. So this one, you briefly mentioned it at the databases level, but it's a critical metric to measure, especially if I'm sure any series behind it. So it's important to track the queries that are executing behind the scenes. The other one is the updates. So this one is important when you're tracking how your users are satisfied with your application. So it's basically there's a formula around it. So I think it's usually the number of satisfied customers. You add half of who is tolerating your service, then you divide by the total number of users, and with that you should be able to know your updates for your it's updates is acronym for it's an abbreviation of application performance index. So the tooling around that, most of them are usually commercial. Because it's a service that is running on your that is running on your servers, so Google will not give you this. They have commercial tools, of course, but you could use you could apply some of the open source ones. So internally, we have Prometheus. So Prometheus allows you to do a decorator around your functions, and with that you should be able to get things like response times. You should be able to get things like throughput. To also track, to give you a nice to give you data around the different metrics that we've observed. Yes, so for the commercial tooling, there are things like how you're faring as far as one service is doing. It also gives you a very nice report, SLA report, for how your customers are viewing your service. New Relic is also good if you have the budget for it, and Datadog as well. There are many commercial tooling these days, so these are just a few of the ones that we've experimented with and eventually settled on Scouts APM. For errors, we have Sentry. So Sentry, I think, is it's a, I don't want to call it a silver bullet in error tracking, but it's a very nice tool to have in your chain for error tracking. It gives you very nice insights into how your application is performing, and all you have to do is add the SDK on your on your application, on your service, and automatically all errors are pushed to a Sentry server. You can host it, or you could have the self-hosted cloud version. So it gives you, you're able to track issues. You can do, trends. You can do a trace back of an error that happened, and you can easily troubleshoot issues. And most importantly, to give you alerts. So if you configure alerts for specific errors, then of course you should now be able to know when errors are happening. So this is very important if you want to track a metric for errors. And finally, in this category, we talked. The other thing is security. For security, there are it's important, especially when you're doing for every application, you have to have security in mind. So when you're discussing security, you want to look at threats are detected, how many have been mitigated. You want to also look at things like misconfigurations. Misconfigurations are when maybe somebody gave a wrong config or leaked a configuration that is secret, and that may end up, costing you a lot, especially in this day and age of the cloud. So maybe somebody pushes access key to or a service account key to a Bitbucket, public Bitbucket, and if that happens, then it becomes a security breach because people can actually start, accessing your infrastructure. The other thing, this is not a metric, but it's something that is, a good practice, especially if you're doing also performance monitoring, is how fast your pipelines are running. Code analysis, I put it there because it's important, and of course, other metrics that you want to track are the OWASP 10. The OWASP 10 gives you like the top 10 vulnerabilities for your application. So you want to observe for that. And the best way of doing that is, of course, there are processes around that. But if you could automate it, it becomes better. And there are commercial tooling around that. GCP provides you with a command center. They have things like Prisma Cloud. Prisma Cloud is another tool that you can use. For code analysis, there's SonarCube. There's Snyk for software code analysis, and also pipeline. So security is also important when you're doing performance monitoring. Now that we've managed to get data on from the different sources, what are the strategies, or how do we how are you going to report now around the data that we have collected? Again, this is in the lens of an SRE guy, but now we want now to look at it from the customer's point of view, because at the end of the day, in as much as a service you're monitoring is running on maybe a cloud somewhere, at the end of the day, you're serving a service to someone, whether it's an e-commerce site, whether it's even a data pipeline. At the end of the day, the data pipeline that you're executing will be used to produce a report about maybe something that is custom. There are a couple of frameworks out there that are important when you're doing performance analysis, especially for services that are running on the cloud. And they are nice because it's not just important to tell me that as an exec that memory is running at 90%. If I'm a VP somewhere, I'll be one. But what does that tell me? What are you trying to communicate? So there are some frameworks that are good and understandable when you're dealing with performance monitoring, and they are easy to communicate with the different stakeholders. So I'm going to introduce a couple of terminologies. So one of them is service level indicators. The other one is service level objective and service level agreements, SLAs. I think most of us are aware of service level agreements. You've seen them somewhere, maybe in a contract where maybe you've performed, you've maybe done a software somewhere, and in maybe the maintenance of the software, you've defined maybe a couple of SLAs where you've said this service will be able to respond maybe within 24 hours. Those are just agreements. They are contractual that are, about how a service will be running. And finally, we have a terminology. We have error budgets. Error budgets, we'll discuss them in detail. There's just terminologies that we will be coming up as we go. So what is a service level indicator? So as an SLI is a measure of performance. So what we've been discussing in the first section was collecting data. So this data is basically SLIs. Not all metrics are going to be service level indicators, but service level indicators are metrics. So one of the measure of performance is something like latency. We've seen that you can measure, you can collect metrics around latency. That was maybe at the APM level, application performance management level, we just talked about. We've seen that you can measure availability. Availability is the uptime. To your service. So this is the SLI. So it's a metric in general, and traditionally people provide metrics around SLIs, and they are good. However, it does not provide a proper vision of how your application is performing. So who is involved in this SLI level? So here we have the team that has configured services at your, that has configured services. It could be your DevOps team, it could be your SRE team, it could also be maybe the engineers that have implemented or it can vent some metrics about how your service is performing. So SLIs are important, and they are collected over a specific window. It's important to know that there's a time element when you're discussing SLIs. So latency, but over a period of time. So it could be collected over a period of time, or it could also be collected over a window. So if it is it could be a rate. The rate is the frequency, like how many are we receiving. It could also be over a period of time, where we are saying over maybe the last 2 hours, over the last 7 hours, and so on and so forth. Yes. Then another terminology that we've introduced is the service level objectives. So an SLO is now a statement that now you can communicate with your project, that as an SRE team or as a server guy with with a business person. It's usually a statement of desired performance. An example, an objective is 99. We want to achieve 99% of uptime for our database. That is, it's a very simple statement, but it's very critical when you're dealing with systems. Now you've moved away from just providing raw metrics, which are the SLIs. Now you're providing statements of desired performances that are important when you're dealing with people who may not necessarily understand what it means when you tell them that 90% of CPU is, consumed, and you're now starting to deal with people that want to know, hey, are users happy? So a measure of happiness is uptime for your service, for instance. So 99% of the time, or maybe we received 10% of errors over a specific period of time. So SLOs are very important, and they are the heart of every metric that you collect. So how do you set maybe an SLO? So you have to observe. These are things that you invite the different stakeholders, and with that, you define how you want to observe your system and how your system is. You want to observe your system. So you're going to choose maybe an aspect of your business, and you start now doing the monitoring. Let's look at maybe an Android app, and the first thing I see are products. So if that is the case, then to be able to define, you'll involve the different stakeholders, maybe the products team, the product manager, for instance. How long does it take to load a metric? Here we are, the product manager may not even care what metric you're measuring. You just want to know how fast is this page loading. So for you as an SRA person, or somebody who has captured the metrics, what are the metrics that you want to utilize for this specific objective that you've been given? So you have the data. We've collected it using Prometheus and Grafana and all those nice toolings that we've observed. But then how do we now make this data to be, constructive? So an SLO will provide you with, so I think the in-depth of SLO, let me first of all discuss the SLA. SLA is a contractual, would also be, in an internal SLA. Usually less stringent, less strict as an SLO, because if I promise that I will deliver 99.999%, then internally my objective for whatever I've provided you to deliver, I've said that I'll deliver, I need to be even more accurate around that. Yeah. So SLAs now are maybe external to whatever you're doing. So you define an SLA based on an SLO that exists. Okay. So then there are error budgets. Error budgets are leeway. So when I say that 90% of the time my service will be running, so the remaining 10% is your error budget. So it means that if I've said that for 1 month, I will achieve 90% uptime for a specific service, So it means that I'm allowed to have the 10, because and as you can see, it's a mathematical measure. It allows you to, now track and report accordingly. So for instance, if a VP asks you, what is your uptime? You're not going to say, I think we've been doing fine this week, or we've been doing the last 1 month, we've fared poorly. What is it that you're using to measure that? So an error budget, it allows that you can be able to say confidently that of the objectives that we are measuring, one of them maybe is availability, or it could be maybe the response time, or it could be the error rate of my application. We have achieved a 90%, and you can actually quantify it, because at the end of the day, all these metrics, you're capturing it, as you've seen using the tooling that we've just discussed previously. So you're able to now quantify that whatever maybe SLI you've indicated, you're able to quantify it. So for the SLOs, as you've seen, they are very critical because different stakeholders are involved in setting up these SLOs. So you could start small if you your business. You could start small. You could discuss maybe you can just identify a few areas for your service where you want to maybe optimize on it. And if you do that, then how do you go about defining an SLO? One, we've talked about SLI, so you must have captured at least some bit of metrics. If you don't have that, then refer to the first section of the slides. Metrics, the latencies, the throughput, the uptime and availability, and so on and so forth. So those ones will form the fundamentals of defining your SLIs. Next step, you have to define now, of course, the compliance period. For any SLO, there will always be a compliance. It's a mathematical objective. So there has to be a period against which you're measuring. And of course, you must have a performance goal for why you setting up this SLO. So the SLIs, we know it's easy to define because you already have the metrics. So the important thing is you define the window, whether it's request based or window based. This one we've discussed a bit, where we said if it is request based, then of course we are tracking the rate, how many are coming through, and if it's a window based, of course it's a period. So are we talking 2 hours? Are we talking 5 hours? Or is it a sliding window where you're talking the last 2 hours compared to the last 4 hours? And of course, your compliance period and the performance goal. Then the other thing is the error budget. So the error budget, now that you have defined your SLO, the next thing to monitor is for error budgets. I mean your error rates. So we said errors are maybe what. So we said an example of an objective is maybe 99% of my get requests will complete in under 100 milliseconds. That's a very nice objective. So it means that for every API that is deployed, you can actually be able to set that. One, because you have you're able to now aggregate this data. And if you define that data and say that 99% of maybe my we return in under 100 milliseconds, then that maybe becomes your standard. And reporting around that, you can actually go and tell and celebrate maybe at the end of the month where you say that we've been able to achieve our objective for the month. Now, if 90% or 99% is what your is your objective for the month, then what happens to the remaining 1%? It means that for every 1,000 requests, 10 are errors. So it's okay when you have 10 errors, the business under that. However, you don't want to hit a rate where when that happens, you don't want to be told when that happens. You want to establish some thresholds against which you're able to identify the triggers that you get alerted when that budget is almost getting depleted. Because think of it as a credit that you've been given. So before you hit your limits, you want to be aware that, hey, I'm almost exhausting my my credit. So that you can also report on, and this is where now alerting will come in handy. So maybe things like PagerDuty, now can start defining, the different thresholds that you can report around. That basically forms the basis for performance monitoring. Before we go to questions, maybe I can give a small example of the kind of metrics that you'd expect to find. I'm a big fan of Prometheus. So allow me to show you, this is a public Prometheus Grafana dashboard. So like we've mentioned, a couple of metrics that you're able to capture, and you can actually be able to do something like this with Grafana. So you're able to observe things like CPU utilization, the system load, the RAM utilization, swap used. Swap is when maybe you've run out of RAM, your application starts writing to disk. And that has a very negative impact on how your application is faring. So Prometheus is a very nice tool. You're able to tell things like, what percentage of your RAM is being utilized. And with this, you're able to plan accordingly for resourcing purposes. Yeah, so there are other, and if you are mostly around infrastructure, if you're not customer facing, there's a very nice method that is a framework. We've discussed the SLO framework to meet business objectives. There's a framework if you're not customer facing that is very important when it comes to now observing servers, because we've said that just observing that 65% is not good enough. So for infrastructure, a framework called use method. It's by a guy called Brett. So just Google use method, and you should be able to whatever hits you get, you should be able to like it's a similar framework to SLOs, but now more geared towards utilization, utilization, saturation, and errors. So you're able to like track key areas for your infrastructure. This is if maybe your core business is not customer facing, or you're just interested in just reporting around your now you're able to report around network and space utilization. Yeah, and I think that would form I would beg to stop at that. I see we're almost done with time, and leave the section for questions if you have any. And yeah, I think that's it. Back to you, Sama.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Mike. Very many takeaways. I think we can jump into the Q&A section for the next maybe 5 to 10 minutes. So I'd encourage our users, our viewers, if you have questions, kindly type them in the chat section and we can begin to go through them. On my end, Mike, that was really good. I think my question is more around performance engineering. How is the global job market for performance engineers? How does that look?
Okay, do you want us to take all the questions, or I can just address
I'm just buying some time.
Okay.
I'm just buying some time to get some questions. Yeah.
So the thing is, everybody has come to, before people used to do their own cloud, their own local clouds, yeah. And with the AWSs, the GCPs, the Azures, the DigitalOceans, it has become, everybody is now on the cloud. So everybody is doing it. If you're not doing it, maybe you have your reasons, but there's a lot of competition out there. And with that, it means that the market is, ripe for performance engineering. Because as long as you're in the cloud, as we've observed, and as long as you're serving people, then you need to be cognizant of how your service is performing. And the only way to do that, especially in the cloud, is to now instrument and to vend metrics around your services. Because remember, these servers are out there. You see them in Europe, you see them in the Asia and the Americas. So it's important to track that. So in terms of the job market, I think everybody is doing it. The environment is ripe for it.
Okay, fantastic. I see a lot of comments here coming through. A lot of people saying thank you for the presentation. One in particular here by Charles is asking if you've ever found a reason for log-based monitoring using tools like Loki in cases where metrics don't get you all you want. Also, some of the tools like, go ahead.
Okay, do you want me to answer that? Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, so Loki is by the Grafana team. Yeah, they're doing a very good job in the industry. So similar to, for instance, GCP provides you with Stackdriver logs. Loki provides you with an interface around which you can do. I think I can stop sharing now, right? Okay. So so Loki will provide you with an interface, especially if you integrate it with Grafana, Loki plus Grafana, where Grafana now, your data source becomes Loki. You can be able to query your logs similar to how you query, say, for instance, Prometheus or your database. You see how you have like users in a database? You should be able to query your logs as though they are queries. So it will provide you with the metrics that you need. However, to define SLOs, that is an objective that internally you will need to define. I hope I have answered your question. Sam? Awesome. I think if Sam, you're talking, I can barely hear you. Maybe I'll take over.
Hi, sorry, a bit of network issues there, but I'm back. So to you, Mike, have you managed to answer all the questions?
Yeah, so there's one here asking about Stackdriver being expensive. The alternatives, I think I've mentioned. So an example is that actually what Charles has said is Loki. Nice tool, so feel free to explore it. Before it used to be the Elasticsearch with Kibana, but I think it's also very good for log analysis. Then Greylog is also very good for that. So there are very many alternatives out there that you can embrace if you feel that Stackdriver is expensive for you. Also important to note is that in as much as you will need them, you'll also need to deploy them somewhere in the cloud. So, and as your data grows, of course, the compute, the memory, the CPU, it means that more, it becomes more expensive with time to manage it. Yeah, I think that's it on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I believe all the questions have been answered. Of course, there's a comment here from Paul. Yes, we are hiring. There is a link there you can check out for specifically our SRE positions. So yeah, feel free to have a look at that link. On my clock, it is 7:04, and I believe we have come to the end of this webinar. I'd really like to appreciate Mike for his presentation, and I'm sure there are a lot of takeaways. For me, it is SLOs and SLIs. That's a new one for me that I'll be using from now on. So yeah, thank you, Mike, for your presentation. Great. Feel free to interact with Mike or any of our engineers. We publish regularly on our blogs and on Medium. So reach out to us and we'll be willing to talk all things tech. So to our guests, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for taking the time to be with us, and have a great rest of your day. See you later.